And welcome again to another episode of Talks Within the Nine-Sided Circle with your hosts,
Noor Kyle and Mushtaq Ali Al Ansari.
Yes, brought to you from beautiful downtown planet Earth. We are here with you today, and it is where Kyle and I are sitting. It is the year of our Lord, 2019 at 7:13 p.m. I could give that to you in Hijra calendar if you would like as well, or any others, but you can also figure that out because everybody listening to this knows how to use the Google.
The Google.
The Google. The Google will tell you anything. Yeah. You want to see a trick?
What's that?
Hey, Google, what's the year in Hijra?
1440. According to Wikipedia, because the Islamic calendar has only 354 or 355 days in its year, it slowly rotates relative to the Gregorian year. The year 2019 CE corresponds to the Islamic years of 1440 to 1441.
And there you have it. It is the year 1440 after the Hijra. And I don't even have to type it in anymore.
Your wife is so helpful.
She is. She's only my girlfriend. She refuses to marry me. I've asked a couple of times, but I am just constantly rejected.
Boo.
But she's always happy to see me when I come back from a trip. She tells me so. Yeah.
Aww, cute.
Yep. So tonight we are talking about the terminal nature of reality, which is to say that everything in the universe that we can experience comes to an end at some point. At least as far as we know. I have not experienced all ends to everything yet, but I'm pretty sure that I will at some point. But each of all of us has experienced some endings. I mean, think about your favorite pair of tennis shoes as a child and when they just didn't fit you anymore, or when they had completely worn out and you had to throw them away. For me, that was a tragedy. It was very, very sad. Or when your favorite puppy gets sick and dies. That's also sad. But it can be, you've just finished your favorite candy bar. Who here has experienced a moment of wistful longing for that candy bar after it's been devoured? Show of hands.
I know I've been there. Yep.
Yes.
Show of hands. All the
Yeah.
hands up. Yep. Yep. Especially when you eat it unconsciously and then you're like, I really wanted to savor that and I just inhaled it. Damn it.
Yep. Yeah, I was not conscious for the eating of that candy bar. And so what do? You eat another one, trying to recapture it. But as Heraclitus pointed out, you cannot step in the same river twice. The candy bar that you eat now is not that beloved candy bar that you ate 5 minutes ago. Now, this sounds perhaps silly and maybe a little trite, but I suggest to you that this is a metaphor for all loss and how humans tend to handle that loss. Think about the number of times, and this is not just for everybody sitting in the room, which is admittedly tonight not too many people, but that's probably all my fault because weirdness was going on with the email clients and all of this kind of stuff, and not everybody got the notices that quick. But think about any time that you have lost someone or something and tried to recreate that relationship or the feeling of that relationship with another person. Anybody here ever done that?
I think we all have.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Nancy's pretty on top of these things. For the rest of us, yeah. And this is, I have figured out from my my years of experience doing couples counseling that oftentimes this is a serial process with both people in the relationship, that they aren't trying to actually be with the person they're being with. They're trying to be with somebody who they are sure that they remember who left. And for people who fixate at 0.4 on the Enneagram, this is even worse. It becomes really, really, really bad because you tend to internalize those people and carry them around with you.
I mean, doing 4.
Yeah.
I have done that.
So, pop quiz. When you lose something, what do you do? Or you lose someone?
Try to find a replacement ASAP.
Yeah, some people do that.
I know.
Oh, I am. There was a woman who I shared a house with, though fortunately not a relationship. She was a good friend, and her husband had died, and she was stuck with her kids and nobody. And I had just blown back into town, so I figured I can help her pay her rent because I need a place to stay. And so we were doing that, and she had a boyfriend, and she was pushing for him to marry her, you know, to move in, have a relationship, all of this kind of stuff. And finally he got so fed up with it that he left and said, no, I can't do this anymore. She was with another guy and moving out of the house to go be with him in Berkeley. It was within 2 days. She could not stand the idea of experiencing this loss, and she had to fill it with something. And it turned out to be a really horrible relationship for both of them. I'm not going to mention any names, of course, because you, at least, Kyle, know some of these people. That's what happens. So, loss is hard. I have to tell you, and if I seem a little bit lower energy tonight than usual, one of my closest friends of many, many, many years died on Friday. And so I'm still in the process of mourning him. It wasn't a surprise. He'd been fighting against a brain tumor for 2 years now. And, you know, it was not a bad death. He kept his consciousness for most of the time. He was able to retire from work, even though he was young. He was in his mid-40s. And, you know, and be with his family for this last 2 years. And just, you know, have a couple of years of decent life. So it wasn't like a bad death, but, you know, that is an ending. This is somebody who I will never get a chance to spend any time with ever again. And he was, when I lived back in Michigan, he was one of the reasons that I decided to stay in Michigan, because I got to hang out with him a lot. And so I'm feeling that right now. So this is a timely topic for us all.
Yeah. I didn't realize he was that young.
Oh yeah, he's yeah, and he was you know, up until the brain tumor decided to take over his head, he was incredibly athletic, very, very, always out. He raised yaks. He and his wife
Yeah.
raised yaks.
He was in a band.
He was in a band, yes. Played the drummer in a rock and roll band. And he was just one of the nicest people you ever want to meet. And so I look at that and I go, one day he was there, and the next day he's not. His consciousness is no longer available to the world. And what do you do with that? This is not rhetorical. What do you do with that? No thoughts?
I mean, the thought, I know we've talked about this. Savoring, you have to mourn, and mourning is part of that process of savoring as well. I think that we always think of something ending as a complete loss, like an erasure of what's come before. And it's not a loss. Like, there's so much that is still there in a living way.
Yeah. And how you deal with it is very important. So I was telling Kyle this story. Everybody knows who Charles Lindbergh was, right? Lucky Lindy, the guy who flew nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean in the spirit of St. Louis, even though the guy was from Detroit. So you don't know why. Yeah, he should have called it the Spirit of Detroit, but he didn't. And everybody knows about the murder of the Lindbergh baby. But who here can remember, I bet you, Nancy, you remember his wife's name.
No, but I do remember some things about his later career and how he has turned up in novels as a result.
Yeah. So his wife was Anne Morrow, who was as great an aviatrix as he was. And unfortunately, she married him and sort of gave up flying to start her family. But she was on par with Amelia Earhart and some of the other really adventurous early women flyers. And I got to see an interview with her back in the 1980s. And she was a remarkable woman for her entire life. And people should know her life because she was as important to the science of aviation as anybody else out there. But everybody remembers her husband. They don't remember her. So I will remember her. And so she and Charles had a child. And that child was kidnapped and held for ransom by a couple of thugs and ended up being killed. And it was a 40-day wonder. Everybody was freaking out over it during the time. And Anne Morrow was talking about various parts of her life, and I was noticing that she was doing something very, very interesting. I'm also being told that my internet connection is very unstable. So if I go freezing on you, somebody tell me so I can repeat myself.
We did lose a couple sentences there.
Okay. So Anne Morrow is talking about her life, and she's doing something interesting. When she talks about the happy things, I watch her head goes down, she gets a smile on her face, and she's down here, and her breath is deep inside, and she is reliving all of those happy feelings. And then when the subject of her baby came up, her head came up, and she spent all of her time looking up here. And she could recall everything about it. But instead of recalling the feelings, she was just recalling the pictures. She was remembering it without the emotional content. And I looked at that and I said to myself, that is so incredibly healthy. She hasn't blocked anything. She remembers the incident as if it were yesterday, but she has dealt with the feelings so that she doesn't have to re-experience them every time she talks about it. And she spends all of her feeling time remembering and remembering the feelings of the good things that she did in her life. And since that I saw that day, I have adopted that as a strategy for myself, is how to deal with loss. So when I think of another friend, one of the things about getting old is that people start dropping dead around you right and left. You just can't avoid it. And so every year I lose somebody else. And a few years back, my closest friend in Michigan, a guy by the name of Ian, he was considerably younger than me, also got killed by a brain tumor. Different kind of brain tumor, but I had to deal with his death, and his death was not quick and not pretty. And he is somebody who I spent years with, as we did blacksmithing together. He was like the other smith, and we would get together and we would pound steel and make knives and axes and other weird things. And so I consciously adopted this strategy of, when I was thinking of some good aspect of our lives together, I would remember all of the good feelings. He and his wife and my ex-girlfriend and I did a color tour one year where we spent a week and a half in the fall cruising northern Michigan all the way up into the Upper Peninsula, which is like spectacular as all the maple leaves and everything change. And we had such fun doing that. And we ate at all of the best restaurants, and we stayed in all of the coolest places, and we got into all sorts of trouble and all of this stuff. And when I remember that, I feel everything about it. When I think of my last visit to him in the hospital, it's just pictures. I don't need to remember the feelings involved with that. I have learned the lesson of those feelings. So I just remember the images. I don't lose anything by doing that. And so there's an actual strategy for dealing with this. And somebody might say, well, aren't you repressing the feelings? No, I have processed the feelings. And the thought that you need to go over the feelings over and over and over again, every time you think of somebody, if they are unpleasant feelings, is silly. You don't have to. It doesn't serve you in any way.
So how do you, without suppressing those feelings, how would you recommend processing them effectively?
First, you have to feel them.
Mm.
And you have to let yourself feel them.
So no denying them.
No denying them. They have to be there. Yeah.
Yeah.
His funeral was incredibly emotional for me.
Mm. This was whose?
This was Ian's funeral.
Ian's, yeah.
Yeah. It brought back the sense of everything that I was never going to have with him again.
Yeah.
And all of the value that the world had lost because of his passing. And I let myself feel it fully. And then I had felt it all. And once I had felt it all, I said to myself, what can you learn from this? And I looked at the various things that were takeaways for me from this. And then I gave myself permission to just tuck the feelings away and just remember the lessons and remember the good things. If I needed to, I could reaccess the feelings, but I wouldn't do that unless there were some actual purpose to it. But you have to process the feelings first. You have to go through a period of mourning for the loss of anything, whether it is your best friend or your favorite pair of tennis shoes. It's all a loss.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that everything in this life has an ending.
Everything.
Everything. And we like to hide from that. I mean, I would hide from it if I could. When you're young, it's easy to hide from it. As a matter of fact, I would say that one of the things that shows you that you have grown up, that you've crossed a particular threshold, is the first time that you irrevocably lose something or someone in your life. And how you deal with that tells you what the next 10 years of your life is going to be like.
What do you mean, if you don't mind elaborating a little bit? Years.
If you deal with it well, then the next 10 years of your life, you will experience more loss, and you will have learned how to deal with that. If you do not deal with it well, if you attempt to cling to something that is no longer there, or recreate it in other things or other people, and I can tell you that there is not ever going to be a pair of tennis shoes that will ever feel as good as your first pair of tennis shoes. They cannot be replaced. No matter what, spend $1,000 on a custom-made pair of tennis shoes, and it still won't feel as good as that first pair. You can't duplicate it. So if you spend your life, the next 10 years of your life, trying to replace that pair of tennis shoes with one exactly like them, your life is going to be miserable, and you're going to go through a lot of tennis shoes or relationships. Or, and this is the worst thing. This is the night of the living dead stuff. The relationship ends, and oftentimes this is where I see it the most in a couple's relationship. The relationship has ended, and the people are still together.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's some serious zombie action there. Am I depressing everybody? Because you're all looking so quiet.
I mean, let's talk about... No, I mean, personally, I feel like this is really important to touch on, because I feel like so much of the time, especially in the modern era, we have all these fixes, all these quick fixes for everything. And that means that we don't take time to process these things. We don't take time to come to grips with loss, or with change even.
Yeah, because change is just another word for loss.
Yes, I guess, yeah, I mean, I find it so interesting how fearful we are of loss. And it's probably the fears we have of change tie back to the fear of loss.
Yeah. Yeah, we would like to have something permanent. And we only have one, there is one thing that we have that is permanent. Do you know what that is? Anybody, take a guess. Anybody but Kyle. Kyle doesn't get to guess. She always knows the answers to these things.
What's coming up for you, Nancy? It doesn't have to be a right or wrong answer.
Well, I was thinking that, well, depending on your beliefs about death, at least until you die, your sense of self is an ongoing thread.
Yes.
But
yeah, we don't know what happens after we die. So, as long as you're alive, you have your own being as the constant.
fairly constant. I remember taking L-phenylalanine, and I didn't feel like me.
But what,
And so I
was,
stopped taking
what
it.
was it that was not feeling like you?
An extremely picky person. I don't know.
What was noticing the extremely picky person?
In some sense, it was me, but okay, it was a change I wasn't willing to accept, you could say.
Okay, so we have to make a distinction here between personality stuff and consciousness stuff. Being is the part that is constant.
Mm-hmm.
Your personality can change with falling off a bicycle and hitting your head.
Mm-hmm.
It can change with a viral infection or a bacterial infection. It can change with a car accident. It can change because you ate a different kind of food or took a different vitamin or supplement.
Right.
But that which is witness to the personality is the one immutable part.
The essence.
This gets back to Ibn al-Arabi's philosophy.
Yeah.
But there is that, and that's the one thing we have to hold on to, is that you as the witness to what has been being given to you, either internally or externally, is the one constant. And the quality of this being will change, because the being that you experience will either be present or absent. It will either be expanded or contracted. There's all these binaries that you can go through, but we're going to look at presence and absence. When your being is absent, it is fixated on some element of your personality that it's identifying with. And that's why it feels change, because your personality is changing all the time. If it is not fixated on personality, if it is present, then it experiences itself as immutable, because it is your being, to wax metaphysical for a moment, your being is the breath of God moving within you. And by that definition, it is enduring. That does not change. So in order to deal with the fact that everything in this world has an ending, we learn to hold on to that which is that which has no ending or no perceivable ending. And that's one of the ways that you get through that. And then you have to teach yourself how to not identify with the stuff that you're given.
The events that happen.
The events,
The
inside
change.
and outside. So you have a relationship, and the relationship doesn't work out. If you have identified yourself as the person who is in that relationship, if somehow some part of your identity is tied up with that, you experience agonies. as the relationship dissolves. And you make yourself miserable. Now, mourning the passing of a relationship is different. It is going, okay, this was alive and now it's dead. It's the same thing as saying goodbye to your favorite puppy. And if you can do that, and if you can remember the good things about the relationship, and you can remember that the relationship is dead now, and those good things are in your past, not in your present, and definitely not in your future, then you will heal yourself of that loss.
Mm.
Is this all making sense to you guys?
Nods, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, although I'm curious about the categories where something either is recoverable or may be recoverable.
Give me an example.
Well, my knees are actually in better shape than they used to be. You know, my ability to go downstairs may be fully recoverable. You know, so it's not like I needed to mourn it.
Okay, well, then in that case, that's not a loss.
It was sure looking like a loss for a while.
Yeah, and yet it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that for a time, you lost your knees. Now you have new knees. You have a new experience of your knees.
Mm. Yeah.
That would be another way to look at it. But if it were me, I would say my knees were in process, and at one point I was in despair of them ever getting better.
And
then they got better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, sometimes relationships do recover. It's just, but maybe the idea is that you can't make it the same thing again.
Well, you can't make it the same thing again, for sure. And if they are having a hard time and they recover, they didn't end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You know, I have relationships that have changed.
Mm-hmm.
It's like somebody was asking me when we were talking about intimacy and such things, if I had ever been married, and the answer is yes. I was married for 10 years, though we only lived together for 2. But that relationship didn't end. It just changed.
Mm-hmm.
It transformed as we grew as people. And that's a really different experience than a relationship ending.
Mm.
You know, because if she could show up on my doorstep tomorrow and it would be wonderful. We would be happy to see each other. It would be a good time. It would not be the same relationship that we had when we were in our early 20s. So you could say that the romantic relationship ended. It died. But the human relationship just transformed into something else. As opposed to everybody has 1 or 2 bad relationships in their life, and I am no exception to this. And there were some relationships that just flat ended. They died. And I would never want to see those people again.
Mm.
And it taught me a lot about letting go.
Yeah.
And a lot about holding on, because in both of those cases that I'm thinking of, I clung to those relationships longer than I should have. I should have been smart enough. Here's the one talking. This is what a one fixation looks like. I should have seen that the relationship had ended long before we parted.
Mm.
But I didn't. Live and learn.
Yeah.
Don't do that shit anymore.
So in terms of transformation, yeah, I guess there are many ways to look at transformation experiences, but nonetheless, so many things are in transition in life. Just in any given moment, we're always kind of entering endings and beginnings. And I think that we are blind to them in a lot of ways.
Yep.
Yeah.
Say more about that.
Well, I'm thinking of, the cycle of a day, the
Yeah.
cycle of a year. Those are in some ways beginnings and endings. We can't get those days, those months back. And yet they offer opportunities to not redo what's already been done, but just to kind of, you can learn from the previous day, and yet you still have, God willing, another day to see what can be done with that knowledge. To see what new things can be done with that knowledge.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can say that suffering is created by clinging to the past and yearning for the future. And what you tend to yearn for in the future is that which you think you had in the past.
Mm.
And the only cure that I know for that is to make sure that you stay in the present.
Yep. I mean, that's kind of what I meant by savoring. Like,
Yeah.
there's so much to be savored in the moment. I think that, I know so often for myself, I spend time living primarily in the future with anxieties and stuff, and also in the past with longings for things that are dead. And what's alive is in the present.
Yep. You ain't wrong.
No.
So, what do you think, Mr. Kim?
Typing, I think.
Yep.
Mr. Kim says, what do you think about meditation and exercise? I think they are some ways to help with processing or transforming loss, especially loss of loved ones.
I think that you are absolutely correct on that. The right kind of meditation, one that brings you to the present moment and allows you to abide there for a while, is very good for that. And there are a lot of exercises that you can do that will help. So yes, I think that this is actually the way. This is the best way I know of to do this. Can you think of a particular exercise that you found helpful in this?
Did you say anything other than you said there are lots of exercises, and then we heard, can you think of an example of an exercise that would help with this? Did you say anything else?
I probably did, and it was about him being right. But yeah, I'm curious to what exercises he may have found useful for this.
Yeah, do you have any suggestions, Mr. King? Or any things that you had in mind when you mentioned that? He says, I was thinking about general exercise.
Oh, you mean like physical exercise?
Yes, he's
Ah.
living it.
Absolutely. Especially if you're feeling depressed. I can tell you that there have been times in my life that the only thing that got me through to the next day was to be able to go into the school and train Silat for 6 hours in a day. Just working myself to exhaustion over and over and over again every day, focusing on the here and now, and having to be present and in my breath and in the room. Because, as you know, in a martial arts class, if you stop focusing, somebody will draw your attention to it by hitting you upside the head.
Yeah.
But yeah, running, swimming, all physical exercise, it seems to be really good for dealing with loss, the sadness and depression that is associated with loss. So yes.
Yeah. I personally find singing helps because it keeps me focused on my body. It keeps me focused on the noise that is coming out of me, And I feel like, especially if it's a room that echoes, that does a lot to keep me present. Because
So
then
before you
building a
put your stuff,
relationship
before you put your stuff in your new room, did you sing in it?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
just wondering.
In my old apartment too, when it was empty. Mm-hmm. That was actually part of how I said goodbye to it.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. I can relate to that because amongst my father's side of the family, singing was very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And so when somebody died, we would oftentimes sit up all night singing.
Mm-hmm.
A whole group of us, and just pass the drum and sing. Last time I did that was for one of my uncles who passed away, and we literally sang from sunset to sunrise.
Mm.
As a way of saying goodbye to him.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, speaking of loss, right? I mean, leaving my apartment has been hard. I spent a number of years there, became really attached to it, went through a lot in that apartment. And when it was time to say goodbye, I guess we can call it sentimentality, we can call it attachment, but I felt like I wanted to express care for that apartment. And that was one of the ways that I did it.
Don't think that it was either sentimentality or attachment.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I mean, I have been with you enough of that process that I can say that with some assurance.
Well, I felt good after.
Yeah. No, I think that you just experienced the natural mourning process. Like just as a child, I mourned my first pair of tennis shoes, and that was a big deal for me.
Yeah.
That was like, one, the first new pair of shoes I ever had.
Yeah.
And two, the most comfortable pair of tennis shoes I ever had.
Mm-hmm.
They wore out. It was very sad.
Very sad.
Very sad.
Yeah.
And I actually took them out and buried them. I gave them a funeral.
Aww. That's very endearing, just so you know. But yeah, I mean, I've gone through similar things with pets that I had to say goodbye to, mourning over them, literally.
Yeah.
And relatives and such. I mean, loss can be such a powerful, deep experience. It doesn't have to be a negative one, if that makes sense.
Yes. Loss is not inherently negative. Loss can
Mm-hmm.
can be sad. Loss can be happy. I remember there was a documentary made on Indonesia again, and in it there was a famous Balinese artist. He was a painter, and he painted in the traditional Indonesian style, and he lived to be like 102. And then he realized that it was his time to die. And he literally made his last painting and then called his family to him and said goodbye to everybody and closed his eyes and died.
Mm.
And, they did a whole thing on his life. And, he had, and this comes to mind because of the moon landing, because he actually sent a painting to the astronauts of his first moon landing, because he had gone to the moon in spirit to see it so that he could be able to paint it better.
That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah. And so here's the funeral for him. And the funeral is a party. His wife, who was probably 95, he liked younger women, was literally dancing and clapping, and the kandang was playing, and everybody was having a really good time celebrating him. There was no sense of loss as much as there was a sense of completion.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can take the place of loss. Sometimes things are just complete. I mean, what do you say when something is complete? You say it's finished.
Mm-hmm.
So, tell me more, Noor.
Well, I'm reflecting on, the thought that everything ends, and I'm thinking, in a sense, everything enters a state of completion.
Yeah, one way or the other.
Yeah.
And if it's a good ending, then it's a good completion.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that says is that at all times you should have your affairs in order.
Ah, yes. Yep.
Yeah. Live every day as if it might be your last. That's kind of cliche these days, thanks to Carlos Castaneda, but it's nevertheless true.
So how do we do that without making ourselves crazy, though?
I know how I do it. And, well, we can debate whether or not I'm crazy later, but this is what works.
Right.
Is that I remember every day when I get up that this is what I have for sure. The moment that I am conscious is what I have.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I will have any others. I'm hoping that I have others, but I don't know that I have any others.
Yeah.
And so I try to make sure that things like, my affairs are as in order as possible. It's like everybody's mother always said, wear clean underwear because you never know when you might get hit by a car. Right? So it's a little bit like that. You have to acknowledge that life is ephemeral. We are not designed to endure. On average, we get about 80 years to play around on this planet. And every day that you wake up is one day closer to the day where you don't wake up.
Mm.
Now, this could be morbid, but if you let it get morbid, it stops being fun. So for me, it's like, what are the things that I'm really going to enjoy? What are the things that I have to do today? And what are the things that I'm going to really enjoy doing? And how can they match up?
Mm. That's a good policy.
Yeah. It's like tomorrow. I have to do something to make some money. One of the things that I'm going to do to make some money is substitute teach a martial arts class over at a school in Oakland. So have to and enjoy. And if I don't wake up, I don't have to teach the class. So it's all good.
Yeah. I think this talk is going to leave people feeling thoughtful, which I don't think is a bad thing.
No, that's what we're supposed to do with some of these talks. They can't all just be laughs. You know, we can't all just tell the funny Sufi stories. But I will tell you one funny Sufi story. So a bunch of students come to Mullah Nasruddin Hoja, and they say, Mullah, tell us what happens after death. And he looks at them and he says, I don't know. And they say, but you're a saint. You're a man of God. And Mullah says, yes, but I'm not a dead one.
What's that?
Did it freeze on my punchline?
Yes,
I
it
think-
did.
This is God having fun with me. So the Mullah says, yes, I am a holy man, but I'm not a dead one.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah. Death is a mystery. We like to think that we know what happens. We don't. All we know is that something happens.
Mhm.
We have assurances that whatever happens probably won't be really terribly bad, unless you're a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad person, and then you get to spend the rest of eternity with Donald Trump.
And what's his punishment? Being Donald Trump?
His punishment is definitely going to be Donald Trump and having if I were Satan, I got my hands on Donald Trump, he would spend his entire eternity being laughed at by everyone.
Ooh.
There would be no pitchforks, no torture, no fire. That would just be, he would find ways to make that okay with his ego. It would be being laughed at. That's Donald Trump's hell.
Mm.
Laughed at and dismissed.
True that.
So there's a thought for you.
When we talk about special places in hell, I guess they really are special. Custom made just for you.
Yeah. For me, it might be every great novel in the world with the last 5 pages torn out of all of them. That would be.
Oh, what? You got cut off.
I said every good novel in the world, all of the world's best literature, with the last 5 pages torn out of each of them.
No.
Oh, nothing to read but Dan Brown.
Da Vinci Code for days, years, eternity. Is that your hell, Nancy?
It might be. I was just hearing a description of prison food where everything is bad.
Oh.
It was the description of making pseudo cheesecake out of all these crappy ingredients.
that sounds tragic. Mm. What about you, Mr. Keem? What would your personal hell be? What do you think? Take a moment if you need to consider the possibilities of awfulness. I know what mine will be. I'll share it in a sec. Ooh, fire and hell still. Yeah.
No.
Yep,
Yeah,
fire
there
is
is
still
that.
pretty scary. I don't know. Mine might be on hold music for, I think it's either Medi-Cal or Mass Health. Like it's the same awful like 8-bit music over and over again for hours. Except in hell, I suppose it would be forever.
Yep.
They had to give you some kind of hope, so you had to keep listening because maybe you would get an answer.
Right. The song's ending. Oh.
Yeah, it would be one of those things. If I were the devil, it would be that music with the promise that in the 1 second where the person comes online to answer your question, if you're paying attention, then you get out of hell.
Oh. Eventually, you'd have to get out of hell, I'd hope.
No, because I would make sure that that only happened when you were asleep, when you weren't paying attention. I'm the
That's
devil,
not
remember?
fair.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's not fair. But more fun, your personal heaven.
Okay.
Yeah, so for me, that's easy. My personal heaven would involve my
I'm
consciousness
gonna think about that.
to
Nancy, do you have any thoughts?
Oh yeah, she gave you Dan Brown.
Oh, you want to see Dan Brown for
No, that was
didn't
the
think
hell.
you did. No, that's hell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, personal heavens.
Well, when I was a kid, I wanted to go to Shangri-La. That's still not a bad deal. It's a novel.
Cool.
You know, you have indoor plumbing, unknown Chopin music to play, immortality. Not bad.
Word. Amen to that. All right, what's yours, Mushtaq?
Yeah, mine is easy.
What?
Mine is to always be able for my consciousness to touch the consciousness of my beloved.
Aww.
That would be personal heaven for me.
I can get with that. I was gonna say something dumb, like I don't know, chocolate mousse cake with strawberries and whipped cream on it and never getting sick of it forever. Yeah.
That's the thing about personal hells and personal heavens is they're personal. How about you, Mr. Kim?
Yeah. So, Mr. Keem said
beach.
Beach and the smell of the sea.
Yeah. All right. Well, there we have a few thoughts on the terminal nature of life on Earth and what one may do about it. And yeah, if people have any thoughts on it, they can leave a comment down below. If they're watching this on YouTube, I would be interested to know any of these things, like what's your personal heaven? What's your personal hell? What is your personal strategy for dealing with losses?
I think that's a very important question. I was going to ask that, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so let us know. Let us know if you like it, hit the like button. If you don't like it, hit the don't like button. Amuse us with your opinions.
Yep. And thanks to everyone for being here.
Yep.
Despite the short notice, we really appreciate that.
And so with no further ado, we will say good night, and I'm going to stop the recording.